I'm Sarah Younas, Digital Programmes Officer at Tyne Wear Archives and Museums. Carolyn and I have decided to split our talk in half, so I'm going to talk first and then hand over to Carolyn in a few minutes. So, Tyne Wear Archives and Museums, or TWAM for short, is a major regional museum service managing a collection of 9 museums and galleries on Tyneside and the archives for Tyne Wear. We have an eclectic collection of over 1.1 million objects from every type of collection you can imagine, including archives, art, science and technology, archaeology, military history, social history, and natural sciences. The possibilities for reuse are endless, but our capacity to be able to fully explore this material is not. I currently lead TWAM's digital programme, and when I use the word digital, I'm talking about it in terms of audience-focused principles that stem from design thinking and practice, rather than digital as something that is technology-led. We have a separate communications team who manage our social media channels and our website, and a separate documentation team who are responsible for the presentation of collections online, and we outsource our museum interactives. So the digital programme is coming from a place of experimentation and R&D. We want to ask the questions that the museum would not normally ask. We want to deliver the projects that the museum would not normally deliver. And we want to look outside of the display case and better respond to audience behaviours and needs. We concern ourselves with trying to understand the public value of museum collections and collaborate with our audiences to produce new innovative projects through creative reuse. And on the slide behind me, you can see some of the collaborators that we've worked with in the past. So back in 2011, long before my time at TWAM began, our first foray into creative reuse came with Flickr Commons, which enabled an online audience to explore our collection's images with free access, although most of the images that you'll find on our Flickr are archives images. So our Flickr sets proved incredibly popular and still continue to do so today. And key learning for us has been how audiences have used the material. Take, for example, a 1930s mugshot of Mr. William Jones that has the words "died in action" sprawled across it. An Australian sleuth was able to uncover that mystery. And Carolyn's going to talk a little bit more about that in her session. And this is an Italian mugshot. This is a mugshot of an Italian immigrant taken in North Shields in 1904. For us, publishing the photograph was about sharing the story of Andrea Ladano, an ice cream vendor who was arrested on the 21st of July, 1904, for stealing a pony. For audiences who reused the image, it was about sharing calligraphy styles, handsome men in early photography, and Edwardian hats. So by uploading collections images to Flickr Commons, it becomes pretty easy to give yourself a pat on the back and state that your office is always open. But in order to inspire the new, the innovative, the creative reuse projects, it takes more than that. And we need to be truly open and generous with our collections and with our time, enabling access, being open to, listening to, and allowing ideas to come from outside of the organisation. People who don't think like traditional museum people. Collaboration is fundamental to the growth of the organisation, and every digital project gives us the opportunity to expand our networks, to develop our skills, and to see things from a new perspective and share more of our rich collection set. With every collaboration, we learn something new about ourselves. We look inwardly and reflect on what can be improved. And with every collaboration, we learn a lot about the frustrations accessing our collections can cause. So in working on The Glass Trunk, which was an album by critically acclaimed musician Richard Dawson, which was inspired by a 1791 scrapbook found in our archive, it became obvious that searching the collection in order to find inspiration was a lot more difficult in practice. As Richard says, "I really struggled to understand how I find relevant material online. I didn't know where to start. If I'd pursued this project without any support or guidance, I might have abandoned it pretty quickly. The most useful thing for me in finding a starting point was having a conversation with someone." And many people have expressed a need for visual or thematic search, death, grief, mortality, etc. And our online collections search interface is very narrow and does not support this type of exploration. In order to generate results, users need to know exactly what they're looking for and can only search by fields such as keywords, accession numbers, and venue. The richness of each object record varies significantly depending on who inputted the data into the collections database. And it's really difficult for people outside of the museum and even staff who work outside of curatorial roles to find what they're looking for unless they have a conversation with someone who can point them in the right direction. We're simply not set up for individual investigative research, and staff spend a lot of time hand-holding collaborators, and if they didn't, projects would quickly die out. Through research carried out by previous colleagues, we have found that collaborators tend to approach their research in one of two ways, either through digging through material to uncover the hidden histories, or choosing visually pleasing material that can be adapted to suit the artist's vision. The projects that are seen through to completion are nearly always the ones that, with the artist that has a willingness to stumble across something. So the need for visual search sparked a new research project that aimed to explore whether cultural organisations with a digital collection could improve access and engagement with their online collection through the adoption of web interfaces and systems that more creatively provoke and respond to an audience's exploration of content. Working with Newcastle University and Microsoft Research and supported by the Digital R&D Fund for the Arts, we developed a supplement to our online collections search, a user-centric collections interface and a software development kit to allow the wider heritage sector to adopt the system for our own collections. Collections Dive is a casual browsing experience for audiences who don't know what they're looking for. The experience allows audiences to lose themselves in our collections, easily navigating visually rich and provocative material without searching. But what's really interesting to me about Collections Dive is that although around 500,000 of our 1.1 million plus objects are digitised, only 6.5% of the images met the minimum standard for inclusion on the site, and even then, things have still slipped through the net. So this lovely image that you see on screen, the description of this image is called "Girl with brown hair pushed back, wearing a blouse." It's really obvious, isn't it? This amazing image here was talking about DNA equipment from a laboratory that we have in our collection. And this looks like a great photo of one of our history curators that you can find online in Collections Dive. And this is one of my personal favourites, the hydraulic pump in a box. So our learning from Collections Dive is that the success or failure of projects like these are dependent on the quality of data that is presented. And while the aim of this project was not about improving the quality of collections data, it has shone a spotlight on something that is becoming really hard to avoid. And it's been made more apparent by the development of intelligent selections, which was an artwork produced by Dominic Smith and Pete Howie, which uses artificial intelligence to predict future museum collections, often nonsensical, but sometimes very scarily accurate. Intelligent Selections was created by training a neural network with object descriptions from our collections database. And aside from it being a really exciting project, which looks at how museums can use AI, and as an aside, we're hosting a mini conference at the Great North Museum Hancock in Newcastle next Saturday, if anyone's interested. But the process taught us a lot about our data structures and unearthed, as you can see, quite a lot of typos. And because of this, we're now looking at how we can positively influence our working practice at TWAM to improve collections data and set new standards going forward through a new strategy, which will include a public programme, artist residencies and masterclasses to empower staff, raise aspiration and build digital literacy and capacity across the organisation. So I'm just going to hand over to Carolyn, who will finish this off.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm going to focus on something just a little bit different, but really picking up on what Sarah's been talking to you about. I'm the museum manager at Discovery Museum in Newcastle, and I also manage Tyne Wear Archives. Quite an interesting collection. My predecessor in the job as the museum manager at Discovery likened the job to being the captain of an ocean-going liner. It goes full speed ahead. It's incredibly difficult to stop. But I've got to try and do that. At the end of the day, my job is really about getting people through the door, getting them to enjoy our permanent galleries and our temporary exhibitions, and getting money out of them. That's really what the focus is these days. And it's sometimes hard to remember that actually providing collections access, particularly through digital with Sarah, is still a core part of my job. So how do I balance them? Because I really believe that digital is an important part of what we do. And that's quite difficult to convince my colleagues that it is going to be part of their work programme when they're starting to think, yeah, but what about the numbers? What about the physical numbers? What about getting into the galleries and things like that? I've not always worked in a museum. My background is as an archivist, and what I thought would be quite useful to do today is talk a little bit about actually some of the challenges that come out of collaboration and that come out about working in a museum and an archive. Back in 1992, I moved back to Durham, and I was invited to a meeting to say, how about doing something digital with your census data? We could put it onto a 3.5-inch floppy disk, and it would be amazing. I thought, oh, yeah, okay, that sounds quite cool. So that's what we did. Except it sort of grew. This is, if those of you of a certain age remember back to the early 90s, there was a lot happened very quickly. And what started off as a 3.5-inch floppy disk ended up 2 years later as a CD-ROM. It was described as a fully interactive multimedia device with scanned images and video. And it was really popular. And it was actually the first CD-ROM to be produced by any archive service anywhere in the UK. I thought I'll talk about that today. So I've dug out my old copy. And this is what I got. And this is a dual format CD. But one of the dual formats is Acorn. If you remember Acorn, it was very popular in schools in the early 90s. You probably haven't seen one for the last 20 years, which is a shame, really, because they were far better than PCs. And one of the other learning things that I remember from doing this project was if only I'd realised that a 30-second clip of a steam train, which everybody was going ooh and ah about in 1992, I could have made a fortune doing an early version of YouTube. I wouldn't be standing here today, but there you go. So 1992, it's only 25 years ago, and yet I can't use that CD, I can't access it. And the data on it. And there's original historical research on that CD-ROM about social history in County Durham, about the early years of the Stockton-Darlington Railway, about medieval Durham through Durham Cathedral and the castles. At this moment in time, it's gone. Don't know where it is. I'm sure there's somebody here could access it, but for now, don't know how to do that. So you'd think we'd learn our lesson. If you fast forward to 2003, there was a very, very significant project called Tomorrow's History in the Northeast. 20,000 web pages, but the website isn't there anymore. It's one of those where it doesn't support. And if you click on the Tomorrow's History website link, it takes you through to one of those pages where it says domain name for sale. So what's happened to the content? Well, Tyne Wear Archives put in over 1,000 images to that website. We've got some of them, but I have no idea what collection they relate to, because if you look at the screen, they decided not to use the original reference numbers that we all use and love on a day-to-day basis. They said, you've got to follow our numbering scheme, which I know the TW stands for Tyne Wear, and then I don't know what the O2 or the O3 or the O4 stands for. So I've got this beautiful picture of an engine, and I don't know what it is. We've got quite a few engine photographs in our collections, so that's going to be a bit of a challenge for us. We got the images back, but we didn't get the data back. So all of the work that went into that project, not that very long ago, we don't have access to. And you know that was a big project. That probably was a 4-year project for a lot of organisations in the Northeast. I'm sure there's people out there who are better than us at keeping their data and can tell you exactly what they had in and how they described it, but unfortunately, we are not one of those people. The other thing I should say very quickly, if you look at it, that is a 748 kilobyte photograph. We haven't got the original scans, not quite sure where they are. Excuse me. Things do move on. Sarah's always talked about the flicker, and we are starting to learn from some of our mistakes, but possibly not quite as well as we would like. So Mr. William Jones, who was this dead villain in Newcastle, this Australian sleuth did this amazing job for us, and there you can see the report from the Times about what actually led to him. I had this vision of this sort of Avengers-type gunfight going on in the streets of Newcastle, which is how he met his untimely end, but actually he just fell off a roof, which isn't quite so exciting. So all of this research, we've cracked it, right? This is only a few years ago. We're going to have all of this data in our database. So I went and checked. We used the same volume in an exhibition. So there is a caption, and it does say he died falling from the roof of a house, landing in its backyard and fracturing his skull while attempting to avoid arrest. But it doesn't actually tell you it was in the Times. So we're getting better, but I think there's still some way to go, because Flickr might not always be there. You know, we take it for granted that this is a really good way of sharing information at the moment, but who knows where it might be in 5 years' time. And if we don't capture the data that's on Flickr at the moment, then we've got a problem. One of the things in terms of where we want to go next is I want to collaborate with Sarah, what she's doing. I want the collections that are in Discovery Museum and Tyne Wear Archives to be really utilised. The stuff that has been generated over the last few years by people coming in and us giving them the freedom to do what they want has come up with the most amazing projects. We do need to get better at recording what they've done. We need to get better at collaborating with them. But I think our data needs to get better across the board. We need to continue to innovate. You know, I don't want to be saying at the end of my career that the best bit of technology that I ever did was a CD-ROM in 1992. I want it to be something that actually is cutting edge in the 21st century. And whatever it is we do, it has to be sustainable. You know, there's far too many projects that we've done where the website has been up for 5 years and then it's died and the content is gone. So a Jewish project that we're doing at the moment, I can't access a website from 10 years ago because it's no longer there. And unfortunately, my computer isn't good enough to cope with the stuff that's in the content management system, that is a WAV file or an MP4. Now that's a technological problem that I've got to sort out with our computers. But if we're not sustainable, then why are we investing? Because if we don't do that, then we're not going to be able to draw. And, you know, the digital is the future. And we've got to find a way to do that successfully. Thank you.